Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is an author making their official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today is a queer writer of queer stories that transmute pain into beauty. Born and raised in a small town of Ohio, they now reside in Los Angeles with their husband and 3 cats. A professional editor and storyteller, they're also a melanoma survivor and a 2-time marathon runner. She is also the proud creative producer at Incision Press, a queer and trans-owned indie publisher based in Australia. So without further ado, viewers and listeners, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, author DeVivo. Des, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here on the show, Des. As I said before, I've been looking forward to this interview all week.
Yeah, it's definitely been like a highlight I've been looking forward to since we met at the OC Book Fair.
Definitely. So, before we dive into the interview, as a little icebreaker question, is there a little known fact that not a lot of people may know about you?
That's that's so funny. To have one off the top of my head, I guess. Oh my goodness. I think one of the things that people don't really like know about me, mostly because it's like a recent development, is I'm non-binary. So that's been something that I've been exploring, and I'm actually like really excited to be exploring it with my writing. That was one thing that really opened the door, and like having a queer community online has been really helpful in that. So yeah.
Nice. And talking about storytelling, we're going to be talking about your book's appreciation of cats. So without spoiling it too much for viewers who have not heard of it, what can you give us as a general overview of your work?
Yeah, so Appreciation of Cats, I have it right here. It's a novella. It's a queer small town romance, and it's actually based on a town in California called Idlewild. It was I went there on my honeymoon, and it was just so enamoring because the city like has a dog mayor, and just the vibes of it and all that. I'm like, that's really up my alley. But the story itself is about 2 veterinarians in the small town, and just sort of the challenges that people face when they have unknown health complications. So like I said, as a melanoma survivor, like that really has to do with the story, as well as one of the characters is going through something similar. And how do we find our happiness and prioritize it in moments of uncertainty?
Absolutely. And I remember from our conversations leading up to this, you are very, very passionate about storytelling and having your storytelling be sort of a safe space for readers as a way to get lost in these new worlds, especially with everything happening around in real life. It's a nice escapism from reality into a world that is more kinder than the real world it typically is.
For sure. And I think it's really important to like, there's definitely, romance as a genre that lends itself to that coziness, right? Where we talk about having a guaranteed happy ending. And so there's no surprises. Like there might be twists and turns, but not really like sweep, you off your feet unexpected. However, like the one thing that I don't like to shy from in my writing is, the concept of realism, that people have happy endings, but they're hard won. And that if you, overcome, whether it's things in yourself and the environment, other people, like whatever it is, that you're going to eventually have that happy ending, whatever that looks like to you, or at least the character itself in the story, right? So yeah, that's definitely talking about having a sense of escapism, but also seeing how other people kind of like, I really like slice of life, right? Like those little moments that make all the bad, worth the good.
Absolutely. So now I'm very curious, Des. What really put you on this path to becoming an author? What were some of the influences that really pushed you to go down this creative journey? And were you always a creative person growing up, or was that later in life?
Yeah, I've certainly always been a creative person. Like I remember as a child, I'm like, I'd be watching the Olympics and I'd be drawing the figure skaters and making little comics and stuff like that. So writing and creating has always been part of my blood. But so there's a difference too between creating for yourself and then taking that step to go to witnessing, right, to publishing, and being like, this is worth, somebody else could benefit from this potentially, or I may not be the only one feeling this. And I have come across books that have made me go like, wow, I never saw that in myself, or I never thought like these things. And so I wanted to offer that as well. Now, the actual part of my first publication of my debut novella,
Right.
Appreciation of Cats, that came around as a result of a couple things. One of the big things is I actually work in the film industry. And so
Ooh.
we know like a couple, like, like 2 years ago, there was a strike that impacted the industry. And so at the time, I was forced out of my creative field. And I was like, I feel like the universe is telling me, like, I need to take this time to make that leap to focus on my things and my writing. So that's what I did. And I started an editorial helping other authors with their books. And then that kind of gave me the confidence to go, hey, I actually could do this myself, and learned more about indie publishing. And I had written Cats for a charity anthology.
Ooh.
Um,
All right.
but the charity anthology actually like didn't go through. And then I was like, okay, well, at that point I'm going to publish it myself. And then I still donated proceeds from the pre-orders to a skin cancer foundation. So that's really what pushed me. And now I'm like, oh, okay, now the small town has a grip on me, and I have just like all these characters that are waiting for their turn. So yeah.
Nice. Well, that's really good that you were able to take the story and build upon it and really give it a life of its own.
Yeah.
It's now I'm really excited to hear the behind the scenes of how an appreciation of cats came about. So let's start at the beginning. So how did overall the idea of an appreciation of cats, your novella, come about? And when you decided upon the title, would you consider yourself a detailed outliner or more of a spontaneous writer?
Yeah. So I had seen the posting for the charity anthology, and the theme of it was better with age. And it was supposed to feature characters who were 65 and over. And they didn't have to be the main character, but they had to have some sort of driving force within the story.
Mm.
And when I was like, okay, obviously I'm not an elder person, and I'm like, that's a very different life experience and lens, and that was all just very interesting to me. And it was funny because I was driving to a dentist appointment, and just like all of a sudden this like voice like came in my head and would not shut up. And it was funny because not only was it a 68-year-old man, but it was also a British man. So, and he was the veterinarian of this small town, and just like the kind of like lens was opening up for me. And that's really where the kernel started, was with the prompt, and then just kind of being like, okay, well, who is this person that's coming through as a result of the prompt? So yeah. And then regarding that, I knew I wanted to keep it succinct because when I finally was like, okay, I'm okay with putting a little bit more of myself into this character. Like, I knew that the main pain point of the plot was going to be him retiring early and his assistant who he's in love with not wanting that, obviously. And the reason for it became really clear to me regarding a potential melanoma diagnosis, but the point was not the diagnosis. As someone who has dealt with that, you have to go like every however often to get skin checks, and a lot of the times they take biopsies each time, and each time it takes 2 weeks to get the results back. So each time it's 2 weeks of just like wondering what is going to happen. And I feel like a lot of cancer stories start with the diagnosis, and I really wanted to focus on like that 2 weeks and that sense of dread, and how can we not get stuck in that and let it defeat us. So with that, I said, okay, I know I want it to be a 2-week period. Like, it's not going to be any longer. It's not going to be any shorter. That is the timeline. And in that, I was able to create a little bit of structure, but still have play to know like where I was going. Like, actually, the end of the book was the first lines that I wrote. So I knew that first, and then filled in the gaps in between and kind of let them decide like sort of how it was going to tell. And what's really fun is if you do like dual POV, is being like, okay, well, does this scene like deliver better from this character's perspective or whose perspective? And just kind of puzzling that together until I felt like their story was done justice.
Nice. Very, very nice.
Yeah, thank you.
So from that point, this actually goes into a few fan questions that I'm going to be asking you, Des. And the first fan question is actually a really good one, and hopefully not too spoilery. But one of my viewers does ask, when writing an appreciation of cats, who is probably your favorite character to fully flesh out, or your favorite scene to write?
We don't like to play favorites in this house, but we know we have them. It's so interesting because obviously there's 2 MCs, Ian Devonshire, who is the main head veterinarian, and Alec Tarley, who's his assistant. Ian is like the main character of the book, I feel. However, there's something about Alec that just sits so right with me, that's very just like sad boy energy. Like, and that's like, my vibe. And there was a particular like scene that would not let me go, of him just like, after he kind of learns that Ian is retiring, he has this moment at this bar where he's just like sulking, and there's really no point to the chapter except to get his perspective of like why this is such an issue, and the internalization of that, and kind of the quietness of it was really important to me. Obviously we love drama, and we
Yes.
love, I mean, people have said like that this book in particular is very like a stage play, and a small drama, like, and I take a lot of, obviously being a film person, like I take a lot of inspiration from like Jim Jarmusch, for example, who's very slice of life and vignette, and that's very evident. But there's something interesting about there not being any conflict except the internal, and just sitting with a character for a chapter, and yeah, and so that, I would say, that chapter really was fun for me, and Alec is fun for me, which is why I also wrote a short story, which is from his POV as well, that I just finished. So hopefully that'll come out for people as well.
All right. And as an add-on to that, what was probably the most challenging scene to bring to life?
I feel like when it comes to romance, right, the confession of love is obviously very hard to get right, because you want it, at least for me, I want it to feel like as realistic as possible. And it's funny because a lot of people get hung up on the miscommunication trope.
Mm-hmm.
And my feeling is like, as humans, we're always miscommunicating, right? Like, it's not really a trope. It's just like a fact. Like, sometimes you're not always saying what you mean, or somebody else is taking it a different way because their head is that way. So just really making it feel like that these characters are real, that they are flawed, and that they are making the best decision that they think is the best at the time, even if it's not, and having that feel realistic to them. So I definitely feel like the big, like, confession moment and kind of the come to Jesus moment was one of the harder ones, just because I wanted it to land.
Interesting. And ultimately, Des, when you were writing this novella, your debut novella, ultimately, what was the goal that you had for this project? And ultimately, the promise you were making, not just to yourself as the author, but also your prospective readers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like I touched on it a tiny bit, just saying that I feel like there's so many different stories where the point is a definitive bow tie end, right? And not, obviously, I count myself a romance writer, and not to say that I don't believe in that happy ever after, because I do think it's essential to the genre. But the fact of what does that look like for each individual person, and especially when it comes to queer stories, like, that can be very different from the heteronormative view of what we define as a happy ending. And it may not even be moving in, and it might not be, getting a dog together, whatever it is. But for this, I just wanted it to come across that it's okay if your win is just to the point that you feel comfortable to be out in public with your person. Just to the point that you even, let yourself let down your wall, can be that win, and can open up, like, to have an open-ended happy ending where the possibilities are kind of endless. And so, yeah, just again, staying within that 2-week scope and honoring the concept that it doesn't have to be a perfect bow tie moment for it to still count as happiness.
Very well spoken, Des. Very well spoken. And now, another thing I wanted to touch you on before we get into what I like to call a series of reflective questions, and this kind of works as an icebreaker to that, is as authors, we always find ourselves in a pickle. We always find ourselves engaging in roadblocks, what I like to call the dreaded writer's block. Every writer has heard that. But even going beyond that, there's another thing that I've also touched on with other guests that not a lot of people really talk about as much, and that is, of course, imposter syndrome for us authors and for us creatives, taking that title and actually telling people and feeling a sense of confidence when we tell people that we are authors. I've talked with a lot of people on the show where they have told people that they're authors, and there's kind of this mixed reaction. That's like, oh, you didn't get what you want to do. That it's kind of like, many, many years ago, being an author was a very, very, very well regarded profession, very regarded title. But now in today's age, it still is. But if you're going, let's say, indie or hybrid, not the kind of reaction we are expecting. So for you, Des, how did you deal with those two aspects, the dreaded writer's block and, of course, the imposter syndrome that a lot of us creators have to deal with?
Yeah. No, I mean, those are really good points, and it's so real. I mean, and it's like the accessibility, function of today's availability of self publishing is amazing. Like I love that. And we get so much more diverse stories and like different ways of telling stories. And that's really great. But it does also, like you said, like make it feel like, you know, I had somebody tell me one time, they're like, oh yeah, if you self-publish a book, you make your money back if you sell 5 ebooks. And it's like not even about money. It's like, what is the emotional turmoil of that? Like, you know, of like all of the work and love that you've put in. And that's why, you know, I started to find success as like, if somebody has it, you know, it's the people who send me pictures of the book with their cat and like, it's something that they read together with their partner. And like that stuff just means a lot more than like my KDP, like charts type stuff. But right, you put one thing out and then you go is it lightning in a bottle, right? And like I'm sitting here going, I've always planned it to be a duology, and I've got all these other stories, but it can be really hard because the other thing that I don't think people take into account for is once you get the first book out, you have to simultaneously market that as well as work on the next thing. And the sheer amount of, you know, time and energy and all that to do those things all by yourself, to be the, you know, when you're self-pub, you are the publisher, you're the author, you're the social media manager and all these things. And you really need to be able to put up those sort of blockades to protect yourself from burnout, which is so much easier said than done. And is a constant act of balance. And I think something that you're always learning about, how to refill your well. And that sometimes as you're sitting there looking at the blank page, the best thing to do is step away, because you cannot like get blood from a stone, right? Like you need to go refill your well. You need to watch movies. You need to listen to music. You need to go explore other people's art and sort of like cleanse yourself. And I definitely know some people when they're drafting, it's like, oh, I don't want to watch these things that are very similar to my thing because I'm going to be influenced, right? And I'm certainly like one of those people too. But also at the same time, I do find it very important that if you're calling yourself an author or writer, you also need to be a reader, and engaging in that way. So yeah, hopefully that answers.
Absolutely. And you gave some really great points, Des. Absolutely, really great point. And that kind of leads into now the reflective questions, which I'm actually going to combine into one very loaded question, because I've been thinking of this topic, and I was actually talking with a friend of mine about this, and I would really, really love to hear your thoughts on this particular question. And ultimately, it falls under the umbrella of what does it mean to be an author in the digital age? Because the industry has greatly changed in the last 20 years or so. And no one would even think of indie or hybrid publishing 20 years ago. They would have thought that was a lesser form of publication. But now it has begun to dominate, or has been dominating the industry for many, many years. And because of it, a lot of authors, especially those in marginalized and unrepresented communities, now have a platform to showcase their voice. And this begs something that I really would like to hear your thoughts on. And I was talking with a friend about this, where one of my good friends, who is part of the Curious Corvid community of authors, really amazing group of people, they were talking to me about how in recent years, a lot of authors, especially those who belong to the LGBTQ plus, queer, and trans community, a lot of their published work is now being misflagged, if that's even a word, as adult rated content. And because of that, that has reflected negatively on their sales or not getting engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And also because of that, some of the social media has been flagged, and it sort of killed their drive to, creating more. Because, like, what's the point if all of my content's going to be flagged, which is not cool, because the content shouldn't be flagged, because there's a lot other works which do fall under the adult content. But unfortunately, in recent years, we have now begun to see a rise. And not to mention, AI is also playing a factor in it. Generative AI, I must say, specifically that version. And this has sparked a debate of whether or not, with all this said, that we're kind of teetering between a golden age of authors or a dark age of creatives. And whichever side we go on could either be super beneficial or disastrously harmful. So, Des, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And also, what has still disciplined you to create the stories you want to tell, regardless of what other people may say?
Yeah. Very loaded question. I'll try to be succinct. The first thing, when we're speaking about censorship, right? Hilariously, so Cats is a romance, a queer romance, but it has no smut.
Right.
Just because it's listed as a queer romance, and just because I listed it under adult content, adult readership, because it speaks a lot about, questions of mortality, and it's got adult themes in it, even though there's no sex. And the book itself was actually like shadow banned on Itch.io like recently because of the MasterCard like issues with allowing their users to use their credit card to pay for like pornography content, which is asinine, and also just it paints a picture of sort of what we're fighting against. Even if like my book has a picture of a cat and they're trying to ban it, and it's like it has nothing to do with that. So what that is also telling us as a society is that just the mere concept of queer happiness and joy is bannable, right? Is the type of message that we're being sent. That is very dark times to be living in. And I completely agree with you. How do you go on, right? This kind of goes back to the concept of right now, you had asked me, you said, what does it mean to sort of be a self-published author in these times? And the word that came to my mind is freedom, right? Your sense of freedom is taken away a lot. What you're allowed to say online, maybe even where you're allowed to go with your passport. And that kind of stuff is boundless on a page. And so regardless of your ability to share it, even though there are many, many avenues, like Substack is blowing up, even if it's not in a bound, I feel like there's a sense that if your book is not bound, if your book is not a big, thick book, right? Because I've slowly gotten, I just say, oh, well, it's just a novella. It's still a book, like, and you wouldn't see Becky Chambers saying that about like their novellas. No. And so that's why you kind of have to build the platform you're standing on, because it's very rare that someone else will do it for you. I'm very, very lucky in that my husband will like talk anybody's ear off about it, and that allows me to have greater confidence in what I'm like, in my sense of being able to call myself an author. Right. But So we speak about freedom, right? And this sense of being able to put out into the world your vision of it or your stories of it. And I think one thing that I've really learned about this, that if I was going to, advise any other person who has a story within them or just has something to say, like, we are battling up against being seen. Because there's so many, so many books, so many that you couldn't even read them all in one time. And more are coming out, and that's amazing. But the one thing that I feel like stands you above the rest is you need to write. There was a course I took with Orlando Silver, who is the director of Incision Press. And in that course, it was called Write Hard. And what it was about was opening yourself up and putting yourself in a vulnerable position on the page, going further than you thought, pushing the boundaries of kind of like the concept of storytelling, or maybe even what kind of stories you want to tell. I feel like when we look at traditional published stories, they're very watered down to a sense of like what kind of topics they are willing to broach, or what kind of prose that they're willing to use. I was reading somewhere that if you're putting your trying to market, you have to do so at a fifth grade reading level. Like you really have to, if you want to keep people's attention, like you kind of have to keep it like, I don't like to use the word dumbed down, but that's like kind of what it is. And I feel like when it comes to indie spaces, like you need to push further than that and have your voice actually be your voice, like to not try to cater to the market, because the market is like oversaturated with the same. What do you have to say, and say it loud, like, so that's kind of what inspires me, is to go, there are certain stories I'm not seeing out there, / these people in my head won't shut up, / how can I offer my vision. It's one thing to go, well, why me? Why am I the one telling the story, right? And that's really what I think about every time I write. And how can I have somebody else feel like they're not alone? And I think that that's something that, as a creative, you certainly can offer, as long as you give yourself permission to go there.
Very true. Very, very true. And that actually kind of goes now into this notion of the business side of being an author, which really would love to hear your thoughts on, not just from your work, but also being part of Incision Press and what that has meant for you as a creative in general. So as a little icebreaker question, Des, after you got your novella published and promoted it, looking back on that period of time, what did you learn as an author about the promotion and the marketing of a book? And is there anything you would have done differently?
I'll tell you what, the main thing that I love is, and it's really hard to find sometimes, but the internet can equally be bad, but it can also be great, right? It feels like it brings us together, but sometimes it makes us, as isolated as we've ever been. But I certainly feel like other authors are not competition, they're community. And you certainly learn the most you can from other people, right? Seeing what works for them, or just speaking together. I'm so fortunate to have found the author group that I have. bless them because, you know, we work together. We go, hey, what trends are happening right now? Oh, I have a Canva template. I'm going to, you know, because even that can save you hours. And it just, but when it comes to marketing, like I will say, the thing that I've found both in the press and in my own personal like endeavors, speaking out on the internet, posting ads on the internet, that is all really well and good. And I've certainly met some great people and readers through that. But there's just something about going in person, going to events in person and posting up at a bookstore, teaming up with indie bookstores. Like Underdog Bookstore in Monrovia, California is like, they're the like gem of the earth. Like, and just having that relationship with other indies, like whether it's other indie authors or indie bookstores, like it just really helps if you feel not so alone in the endeavor. And it also is so interesting because I'll go to events and I'm like seeing people and I'm like, I would have never thought that someone like you could be a reader. And that really opens my eyes to the concept that, you know, there's been tons of people that I've had events and young folk will come and they're just like, I'm wondering about my identity and I'm not able to, you know, find anything like this. And here they are able to have complete conversations with people who are actually doing it.
Right.
To them be inspired to either, you know, use their own voice and write or read stories that they never would have been able to have access to if they were only shopping at a Barnes and Noble. So my main thing that I would not necessarily do over again, because I challenged myself this year to go to at least one in-person event every month, which I was very lucky to have done. And so I would just say I would do that. I would certainly do that over again. And I would encourage anyone else to do the same thing, because in-person events are really where you're building your community and you're able to have conversations with readers that turn somebody who just like is kind of curious about your book into somebody who's may potentially see you as an auto buy author in the future.
Very well spoken, Des. Very well spoken. And this kind of goes into another thing, as you talked about probably earlier before, is this notion of identity and who to write for. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that other authors have to struggle with is understanding our audience. I'm actually going to combine another question to this. It will be a two-parter. And that is, as authors, we are always told to write for our audience. That's not always the easiest thing to do, because the audience, let's say in this case of romance, even if you're writing in the romance genre, everybody has an inkling of how a romance is supposed to go. And 9 times out of 10, that's not always going to be the case. And as authors, we find ourselves in this very tightrope balancing act of showcasing our authenticity and individuality as authors, while also being mindful of the genre that we're writing in. We don't want to write a story that's so familiar that people will say it's a carbon copy of an already existing title, but we don't want to make something that's too new that's going to throw people off. So I'm very curious. When working with Incision Press, did that help you get a better idea of yourself as an author and finding your voice, while also getting an insight into the types of readership that is sprinkled throughout each individual genre in the publishing world?
You know, it's so interesting because I think we like to think that like when you think of a romance reader, like a picture of a person pops in your mind.
Right.
And that is not the way to look at it, right? Like there's a movement right now. I wouldn't even call it a movement. There's people speaking about how we have this concept of like book girlies, like hey girlies, like whatever, and how that's very it it's sections, right? Like it's not inclusive in
It
this.
puts us in a box.
And also I completely understand, like I'm a person who uses bro and dude, and that's very just kind of like friendly in a way. And so I don't really want to get into nitty gritty of like, oh, who can identify in this and that. But it's this concept that we narrow down our readers into this sort of picture perfect reader, when in reality, like we want to be casting larger nets because we don't know who our story could connect with. And that's sort of the beauty of it. And I'm certain that there are other people who would tell me I'm dead wrong in that, and that I do need to be like drilling into a certain like readership or a certain avenue. Like, hey, don't and I've done the same thing, right? Like I don't have cats on Kindle Unlimited because those readers, when they were picking it up, were pretty much like, yeah, this is cute and all, but like, where's the smut? And I'm like, like you knew from the beginning, like you knew from the jump what it was, but it's what you're looking for in that environment. And that's completely fine. Not yucking, yums. And there will be books in my future that will do well there. But you have to look at every book individually. And so I kind of have slowly learned like where they play well and maybe where they're not going to get very many bites. It's hilarious because there will be certain events I go to because I have cats, but I also have a charity anthology from the ACLU, and I have Incision Press's trans and queer erotica anthology. And sometimes when I take those, like they're flying off the shelf. And sometimes when I go, nobody's paying attention to those and they're just looking at the cat book. And so it's just, you start to get a feel about that. But again, that goes back to sort of being in person, because you really have to go through a lot of data if you want to track that on the internet.
Very true.
Because there's so many different avenues that people can find your book through, and sometimes you just don't know. Like it'll be so funny because there will be author friends who's like, oh my god, my page reads are going off, blah blah blah, but I have no idea why. Is it because somebody recommended it in a Facebook group? Maybe. I don't know. And so that's just always really hard to track. But yeah, so I feel like for me it's like, if I really try to stay away from promoting with I don't want to undersell the themes of my book by just making it about tropes. I think that can be really easy marketing to fall into that may not do your story justice. So to, like you said, walk that tightrope between, putting the bait out there and saying, okay, if you like small town romance, if you like cozy reads, and then kind of reel them in and go, okay, this is the deeper themes of the thing if you're into all this. And also there's cats. Like
Yes. Absolutely, Des. Absolutely. And as we're now approaching the end of this amazing author interview, there's actually one question I haven't asked a lot of people, or many people, in quite a long time, and it's probably one of my most important reflective questions to date. And it is the notion of the 3 E's: educate, entertain, and enlighten. For you as a storyteller, what do those 3 E's mean to you?
Oh, I love that question. I would equate it to your why, right? Educate is like your moral that you want them to take away, sort of deal. The enlightened part I love, because it's like, what lessons, not just about the world, but about themselves, do I
Mm-hmm.
want them to walk away with? And the sense of entertain, obviously, is
Right.
can they get lost in this and kind of take a break from their reality and be somewhere else for a little while? And I love that because I always say to people, like, if they're like, hey, you know, on their stories, look what I'm currently reading, whatever. I always say, like, enjoy your time in Holly Grove, which is the small town, because I just see it as like, you know, books are little worlds and it's like a little vacation. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to keep all those in mind, uh, and how to balance it. And for me, if I was going to do anything, it would be the enlightenment part, the witnessing of, like, you're not alone in your struggles, but you also don't have to be alone in your wins either.
Very true. Very, very true. And another thing I want to talk to you about is, of course, as authors, one of the most driving factors of sales is, of course, reviews and recommendations.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that your husband has probably been your biggest cheerleader in terms of promoting your book. I'm curious, what about friends and family who learned that you were working on this novella? What was their reaction like? And generally speaking, from the inception part to now, have the reviews and feedback been the same?
Yeah, I'm really lucky. I'm really lucky. Um, it's been really great. As I was saying, like, I kind of started my author, like, transition into an author during a career shift, right? So, or not necessarily a shift, but a pause. And it's interesting because where I'm working now, like, all my coworkers know about my book, and they
Mm-hmm.
knew about it, like, before I started. Um, and it feels really nice because they're all super supportive about it and they talk about it, and it doesn't feel like a big shameful secret, which I feel like sometimes being an indie author can feel, because as you were saying, there's some times that you're made to feel like, oh, you're not at this place, or oh, you're not, like, published. I think I'm very blessed to be around creatives who understand that creative endeavors, regardless of how big or small, if you go through with it and you make the steps, like, that's a big accomplishment. And to be constantly surrounded by reminders of that, whether it's folks online who are praising it, or the people in my life who praise it,
Right.
that helps me remember, you know, okay, so what, you get a 2-star review, like, it just wasn't that person's cup of tea. And that's completely valid as well. Like, I'm not going to be for everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
the people that I am for, um truly enjoy it. And it's so fun for me, like, as I continue writing and as I continue building out the world, to go to those readers and say, like, hey, like, I actually have something cooking, like, do you want to read it? And they're so excited, and their excitement excites me and helps me keep going. So yeah, like I said, I've been real lucky in that aspect, and I don't worry so much about reviews. I know they're really helpful, but it's really the little conversations I have with people that mean the world to me.
Nice, nice. This. Now we're going to go into some rapid fire fan questions. I'd like to hear your thoughts on these. So I think I already know the answer for this one, but I'm going to say it anyway. Themes or tropes in storytelling?
Mm, that I like or that I use.
Um, it could be both.
Yeah, I mean, I realized I'm really into, like, coworker relationships. I'm really into, like, forced proximity type things, like, and uh I love being able to do, like, combine uh cozy slice of life. So yeah, I'll go with those.
All right. Next one. most overrated theme or trope in storytelling?
Overrated. Overrated. Okay, I have to say like Sunshine and Black Cat. Like I'm like it's too like yeah. I think I think things I think things are too black and white, and I really like gray areas.
Okay, all right. Follow up to that, most underrated theme or trope in fiction.
Mm. I'm gonna go miscommunication trope. I gotta go with that because, like I said, I feel like it's not appreciated enough that in every day we have little miscommunications that then turn into um, little chances for connection.
All right, all right. Next one, which is more difficult to be consistent,
Mm.
showcasing a character's authenticity or demonstrating their complexity?
Ah, I'm gonna go with authenticity. I feel like it's very because I write a lot of non reliable narrators. So they
Mm.
are lying even to themselves. So I'm like, bro, okay, like how do we get you back on track? Like because you seem like you're inconsistent even though you're being consistent in that inconsistency.
All right. Next one, and I love asking this particular question because I got a lot of differing answers on this one. In the world of fiction, what is the most difficult sense of the physical senses to emulate?
Oh, uh I want to say like touch is really hard. I feel like touch is very hard, and it's very important in romance because there's only it feels like sometimes there's only so many ways to describe it, but it also is like how do you work with that in romance if one of your characters is neurodivergent or touch adverse, and
Right.
how do you make them like seem not uh like standoffish or
Mhm.
rude or whatever, and how yeah how do you work with that? I say touch.
All right. Next one, which is probably the most difficult scene, and I'm going to word this specifically for
Mm,
romance writers,
mm,
an emotional scene or a conflict scene?
mm. I mean, literally they're like almost the same thing. Like I would view them as almost the same thing. I think if you're writing dialogue it can be easier, but if you're writing without dialogue it's harder because how do you get across the conflict and or the emotion? um so yeah, I'll say that.
All right. All right. Next one, my personal favorite. That this question's going to become one of my personal favorite questions to ask authors. If your book had a music track attached to it, what would be the theme songs that would be associated with each of the main characters?
Oh my god, that's crazy. So I'm actually not going to talk about Cats for this one because Cats already has a Spotify playlist that people can listen to.
All right.
I'll talk about my current whip, which is my next book in the Holly Grove series. And I've been thinking about this. Like, so it's between a postmaster at a post office and kind of like a temporary employee. And the postmaster is like Noah Khan. His music is just like that's just who he is. And then the intern is this it's a woman performer. Her name is Blue Eyes.
All
And
right.
and just like the type of sad, happy vibes of that music, and the kind of like rural like solitude of the other coming together. Like every time I listen to those songs, I'm like, those are those characters.
Nice. All right. And kind of a follow-up to that. And this is going to be, I'm going to gear towards Kat.
Mm.
If your novella was ever picked up to be transformed into either a limited series or an indie film, who would you want to cast as the two leads? And bonus question, who would be the director?
Oh my God. Okay. The director would either be Jim Jarmusch, obviously, but probably not. Probably Noah Baumbach. Like, would be the vibe. And then the actors would probably be Martin Sheen for Ian Devonshire. And then maybe like Charlie Cox for Alec Tarley.
Ooh,
Yeah.
okay, an interesting combination. Nice, very nice. And probably the last of the rapid fire, which is probably the most difficult for an author to deal with when they're reaching the end of a story. Knowing when the story is truly finished or knowing when to stop writing.
Knowing when to stop writing. Because look, I'm also gonna like port that over into editing, because like you could write and write and write, and like when do you let go of those characters, and like when do you put the pencil down, like, and I just feel like knowing when to not let perfection overwhelm you to the point that you're not going to release.
Right. Nice. Very, very nice. And finally, we now arrive at the final two questions of this amazing author interview. So in this interview, we talked about a lot of great things, and you definitely provided some great insight and feedback and advice for a lot of great authors. And here is the final question. With everything we've talked about and more, and with everything you have learned in your career and will continue to learn, ultimately, what do you want people to take away from your style of works? When people hear your name 20, 30, 40 years from now, what do you want people to take away from your works?
Yeah. So I think the main thing is just the hard won happy endings, right? That you can go through difficult challenges and still overcome, and still, the ellipses, right? That your story doesn't end here, is very important to me. So I would say that I hope it gives people hope. I hope people are inspired, and I hope they feel like safe and witnessed.
Nice. And what would be your word of wisdom to fellow authors and writers in the indie community who are watching and listening to this interview right now?
Yeah, I mean, my main thing is get on the page. Like, you got to write hard, you got to write your truth. And first of all, write for you. And the second thing is you need to build your community and treat others the way you want to be treated. Gatekeeping is not a thing. Like, you just gotta you need that support system, I feel. And yeah, always I always tell people this too, like my DMs are always open. So
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing and incredible author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Des for coming on the show, and hopefully not the last time we see her on the channel. If you would like to see her back on the channel for the Writers Hub series, like this video, comment, and subscribe. Now, Des, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. Where can people find you on the interwebs if they want to reach out and connect, as well as purchase a copy of An Appreciation of Cats? And as you mentioned earlier, are there any surprises we can look forward to for the new year?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And again, thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome. So if people are interested in following me, I'm very active on Instagram. And so my @ is DeVivo.writes. And that's my @ for Instagram and Threads. I'm also, you can also find me at desdevivo.com. And that's also where you can find links to my work. And a few of the things that I have going on is I'm going to be having a free story come out for people who subscribe to my newsletter. I don't post newsletters very often. So yeah, if you subscribe to that, that's for a motocross series that I'm working on. There will be the first 3 chapters that are going to go out soon to all subscribers. And then the other big thing, which I really haven't told anyone about, is Cats is actually being made into an audiobook, which I'm super excited about for accessibility reasons. And just I'm working with a really amazing narrator. And so I cannot wait for that to come out.
Awesome. I'll link all that down below in the description of this video, viewers and listeners. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing, incredible episode here on the channel. I do have a few episodes coming out later next week, and that will officially sign us off for 2025. I'm going to be taking a much-needed vacation, but I'll be back again with more episodes, with more guests, more than ever for January of 2026. So make sure, again, to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay up to date with all of my content. And as a reminder, Decimus will be released on Christmas Eve. So I'll attach that link down below. It'll be available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And make sure, again, to follow Des on all of her socials. Make sure to order a copy of An Appreciation of Cats. Leave reviews. Reviews are the driving force for us authors. It builds engagement. It builds our readership and more. So make sure to order yourself a copy as well. And as always, it's been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful evening wherever you are in the world. Happy holidays, everybody. Merry Christmas. Stay safe. And we'll see you all in the final episodes of December 2025. Until then, have a wonderful day.